Before angels were imagined as winged guardians or symbols of comfort, they were understood as something far more precise and far more unsettling. In the earliest records, angels were not described by appearance, emotion, or personality. They were defined by function. They arrived without warning, spoke with absolute authority, altered the course of events, and disappeared without explanation. They never argued, they never hesitated, they never acted on personal desire. And perhaps most strangely, they never explained why they were there. Across centuries of biblical memory, angels appear only at moments when human understanding reaches its limit, when a decision must be enforced, when knowledge becomes dangerous, when reality itself requires intervention. So the deeper question is not who the angels were. The real question is why reality required them at all. Welcome to Hidden Origins. This channel explores ideas with patience, depth, and historical clarity. Let us begin. In the earliest biblical worldview, angels were not introduced as characters in a story. They were introduced as operations within a system. The ancient writers did not describe a universe governed only by physical laws and human choice. They perceived reality as layered, structured into domains of authority, access, and limitation. Humans occupied only one layer of that structure. Angels operated between layers. This is why angels are rarely named, rarely described, and never psychologically explored. Their individuality was irrelevant. What mattered was their assignment.
The original language used for angels describes a role, not a species, a messenger, a delegate, an authorized carrier of intent. This immediately removes angels from mythology and places them into something closer to administration. They were not beings of imagination, they were instruments of order. When angels appear, they do not negotiate with humans. They announce outcomes. They enforce boundaries. They redirect futures that are already in motion. Their presence signals that a threshold has been reached, one that humans cannot cross alone. This framing reveals something important. Angels were not created to comfort humanity. They were created to limit humanity. In the biblical imagination, unrestricted access to divine knowledge was dangerous. Direct exposure to ultimate authority could overwhelm, distort, or destroy human agency. Angels functioned as filters, allowing information to pass downward without collapsing the system. This explains why angels often appear in moments of transition, at the beginning of new eras, at the end of old ones, at the crossing points between obedience and rebellion, life and death, order and chaos. They guard entrances, they block returns, they announce irreversible decisions. In this worldview, reality is not open source, it is regulated. Angels ensure that the structure holds. And notably, angels never seek worship. When humans attempt to revere them, the response is immediate rejection. This is not humility, it is protocol. Worship would collapse the hierarchy. Angels are not ends, they are conduits.
This detail separates biblical angels from mythological intermediaries. In many ancient cultures, divine messengers evolved into gods. In the biblical tradition, angels remain strictly subordinate. They cannot redefine themselves. They cannot deviate from instruction. This rigidity tells us something profound about how ancient thinkers understood order. Authority did not originate from power or charisma. It originated from alignment. Angels possessed authority only because they were aligned with a higher will. Once alignment breaks, authority disappears. This becomes crucial later when biblical texts introduce the idea that not all heavenly beings remain aligned. The system itself becomes strained. Order is no longer automatic. But at this foundational stage, angels represent stability. They are the visible edges of an invisible structure, proof that reality is not random, but regulated. Before angels become symbols, they are mechanisms. Before they inspire awe, they enforce limits. And understanding that function is the first step toward understanding everything that comes next. If you value calm, original, long-form documentaries that explore hidden structures behind ancient ideas, subscribe to Hidden Origins. The next part expands this system and reveals how angelic roles began to diverge and why that mattered.
As biblical thought developed, angels began to appear less as a single category and more as a structured network. Their roles did not expand emotionally or symbolically, they expanded administratively. What emerged was not a hierarchy of power, but a hierarchy of responsibility. Some angels are consistently associated with communication. Their appearances coincide with moments when information itself changes history. Others appear during periods of instability, enforcing limits when human actions threaten to collapse order. And some are associated with oversight, observing, recording, or standing in silence as witnesses rather than participants. This differentiation suggests that ancient thinkers were not speculating randomly about the unseen, they were mapping a system. In this system, angels functioned like extensions of governance, not rulers but regulators. They did not decide outcomes, they ensured outcomes unfolded according to a larger design. This becomes especially clear when examining how angels interact with time. Angels are never portrayed as surprised. They arrive already aware of what is about to happen. Their messages often confirm events already set in motion, rather than creating new possibilities. In other words, angels do not generate destiny. They signal alignment or misalignment with it. Another critical pattern emerges when angels engage with individuals versus communities. When dealing with individuals, angels deliver precise instructions. When dealing with nations or groups, angels often appear indirectly, symbolically, or through layered visions. The scale of the message determines the distance of delivery.
This implies a safeguard. The greater the impact, the less direct the intervention. Large-scale outcomes are not micromanaged. They are guided from a distance. Angels, therefore, are not solutions, they are constraints. Their presence limits human interpretation while still allowing human choice. They clarify without coercing. They reveal without overwhelming. This balance preserves agency while maintaining structure. Importantly, angels are also restricted in what they can disclose. Many angelic encounters end with partial information. Questions are left unanswered. Timelines remain vague. This is not narrative drama. It reflects a worldview in which total knowledge is neither available nor desirable. From this perspective, angels are guardians of ignorance as much as guardians of truth. They prevent premature understanding. This explains why angels often appear enigmatic, even frustrating. They provide direction without explanation, instruction without justification. They assume compliance, not comprehension. And yet, angels are never portrayed as arbitrary. Their actions align consistently with a broader moral architecture. They reinforce accountability. They mark consequences. They ensure that actions echo beyond the immediate moment.
As the narrative world grows more complex, another subtle tension emerges. Angels are perfect executors, but they operate within a system that now includes human resistance. People argue, they hesitate, they disobey. Angels do not adjust to human discomfort. They deliver their message regardless of reaction. This rigidity highlights a growing disconnect between divine order and human perception. Over time, this gap becomes significant. Human history accelerates, societies multiply, moral clarity fragments, and angels, unchanged, precise, unwavering, begin to feel increasingly distant. They appear less frequently, but with greater intensity. Their rarity increases their weight. When an angel appears now, it signals disruption. Something has drifted too far from alignment. The system requires recalibration. This sets the stage for an emerging question within the biblical worldview. If angels represent order, what happens when order itself is contested? At this point, angels are no longer merely messengers. They become indicators. Their presence reveals stress within the structure they were designed to protect. And this is where the narrative begins to shift from stability to tension. If you're finding value in this calm, structured exploration of ancient systems and ideas, subscribe to Hidden Origins. In the next part, we'll explore what happens when alignment breaks and how conflict enters a system that was never designed for it.
As the biblical narrative progresses, angels begin to appear in contexts that are no longer purely stabilizing. The system they represent remains intact, but the environment it operates within has changed. Human history has become morally fragmented. Authority is questioned. Alignment is no longer assumed. This is where tension enters the framework. Angels are still precise, still obedient, still constrained by assignment. But now, they operate in a world where resistance has become normalized. Their interventions are no longer simply directional, they are corrective. This shift is subtle but profound. Early angelic appearances reinforce structure. Later appearances respond to disruption. The language surrounding angels also begins to change. They are associated not only with messages, but with conflict, delay, and opposition. Some are described as being resisted. Others are depicted as waiting, an idea that would have been unnecessary in earlier stages. Waiting implies obstruction. This suggests that the unseen order is no longer functioning frictionlessly. The system still exists, but it is under strain. In this context, angels are no longer merely intermediaries. They become indicators of systemic pressure. When angels are delayed, blocked, or engaged in opposition, it signals that alignment is being actively contested, not just by humans, but within the broader structure itself. Importantly, angels do not initiate this conflict. They respond to it. This distinction matters. The narrative does not frame angels as agents of chaos or ambition. They do not seek power. They do not expand authority. They remain bound to their assignments. The conflict arises from divergence, entities or wills operating outside the intended order. From a documentary perspective, this introduces a new layer of meaning. Angels now function as stabilizers in an unstable environment. They are no longer background infrastructure, they are stress responses. Their appearances become rarer, but heavier. When they appear, something has gone wrong. This is also where angels are increasingly associated with judgment, not as punishment, but as correction. Judgment in this framework is not emotional, it is procedural. It restores balance by addressing deviation. Angels enforce consequences, not because they are harsh, but because the system cannot sustain disorder indefinitely. Another crucial development occurs here.
Angels are depicted as limited not only by role, but by jurisdiction. They do not operate universally. They are assigned regions, domains, or functions. This reinforces the idea of a structured cosmos with boundaries even within the unseen. No angel acts everywhere. No angel knows everything. This limitation protects the system from consolidation of power. Authority remains distributed. Control remains segmented. Order is preserved through decentralization. Yet, decentralization also introduces vulnerability. When parts of the system diverge, response is not instantaneous. Delays occur, overlaps emerge, conflicts persist longer than expected. The system is resilient, but not immune. This creates a paradox. Angels represent order, yet their very presence now reveals disorder. They arrive not to introduce something new, but to contain what has already escaped alignment.
And notably, humans are often unaware of this deeper conflict. From the human perspective, events unfold politically, socially, psychologically. The angelic layer remains hidden, surfacing only briefly and cryptically. This reinforces a central theme. Angels do not exist to make reality transparent. They exist to keep it functional. The lack of explanation is intentional. Full disclosure would destabilize agency. Too much clarity would remove responsibility. Angels intervene without illuminating the entire system. At this stage in the narrative, angels are no longer simply messengers between heaven and earth. They are boundary enforcers in a fractured reality. Their role has not changed, but the context has. And that distinction leads to a final question. If angels maintain order and disorder persists, what is the ultimate purpose of their presence? Are they temporary mechanisms? Are they permanent structures? Or are they placeholders holding reality together until something else emerges? The final phase of the narrative does not answer these questions directly. Instead, it reframes them. And that reframing leads us toward resolution. If this deeper layer of the story is reshaping how you think about angels, order, and conflict, subscribe to Hidden Origins. In the final part, we'll examine what these patterns ultimately mean and why angels slowly fade from the center of the story.
As the biblical narrative moves towards its later stages, something quiet but significant happens. Angels do not disappear, but they recede. Their appearances become rarer, less frequent, and more symbolic. This is not because their function has failed, but because their role has reached a kind of completion. The system they maintained is no longer in its formative stage. Earlier, angels appeared constantly because boundaries were being established, order was being defined, humanity was learning where limits existed. But once those limits became internalized, once moral responsibility shifted inward, the need for constant external enforcement diminished. Angels were never meant to replace human agency. They existed to protect it during its early, fragile stages. This reframes their apparent absence in later periods. Silence does not indicate withdrawal, it indicates stability. In mature systems, intervention decreases. Structure becomes implicit rather than explicit. The less visible a regulator becomes, the more successful it has been. Another shift occurs as well. Meaning moves from spectacle to conscience. The story is no longer about sudden appearances or overwhelming authority. It becomes about choice, alignment, and accountability without visible enforcement. Angels fade because responsibility has been transferred. This does not make angels obsolete, it makes them foundational. Like scaffolding removed once a structure can stand on its own, angels withdraw when their presence would interfere rather than assist. From this perspective, angels were never the focus of the story. They were the architecture that allowed the story to unfold without collapsing. They ensured that reality had coherence while humanity learned to navigate it. And importantly, angels never evolve into central figures of devotion. The narrative resists that shift deliberately. Worship remains directed beyond intermediaries. This preserves a crucial distinction. Angels manage the system, but they do not define its meaning. Their authority remains procedural, not ultimate. This explains why angels consistently redirect attention away from themselves. They are signposts, not destinations. By the end of the biblical arc, angels represent something subtle but profound. The idea that reality is not abandoned, even when it appears silent. Structure does not require constant visibility to exist. Order does not announce itself. It sustains quietly. And perhaps this is the most enduring insight angels offer, not as beings, but as concepts. They reveal a worldview in which chaos is constrained, knowledge is filtered, and responsibility is earned rather than imposed. Angels stand at the intersection of freedom and limitation. They exist to ensure that one does not destroy the other. They are reminders that power can be delegated without being surrendered, that authority can operate without spectacle, that guidance can occur without domination. In modern imagination, angels are often reduced to comfort symbols or aesthetic icons, but in their original context, they were something far more challenging. They represented a universe that was structured, moral, and restrained. A universe where not everything was accessible, where not every answer was safe, where growth required boundaries. And in that sense, angels still exist, not necessarily as visible figures, but as ideas embedded into how meaning, responsibility, and limitation function. They are present wherever restraint protects freedom, where order allows choice, where guidance respects agency. The story of angels is not ultimately about the unseen. It is about how reality remains coherent when freedom is introduced. And that may be why angels step back at the end of the narrative, because the final test of order is not obedience enforced from above, but alignment chosen from within. If this documentary changed how you think about angels, not as myths, but as systems, subscribe to Hidden Origins. Here, we don't chase spectacle. We trace the structures that quietly shaped human understanding. The unseen does not vanish, it simply stops announcing itself.